Yeah, welcome to the latest episode of the Racer X Exhaust podcast, brought to you by Yoshimura, special edition, diddle-it, breaking news. Motocross of Nations is coming up this weekend. Monster Energy FIM Motocross of Nations at RedBud. This is unbelievable. This needs to be celebrated, and we're going to do it the way Racer X likes to do it, by getting Davey Coombs to tell awesome stories about motocross history. There's so much here that this is a two-part podcast. We're going to give you nearly 3 hours of Team USA information to digest between now and next weekend. But I have to thank, of course, Yoshimura, who backs this show. 63 years of research and development with four-stroke exhaust systems. They had everything you need for whatever you are riding. Yoshimura, yep, big thanks to those folks for helping us out. Check them out also on social media as well. They got a lot of cool stuff, and a lot of the great motorcycles that'll be racing this weekend at RedBud will have Yoshimura exhausts. Have you seen that Ken Roczen Honda for Team Germany on Roczen's Instagram account? Looks good. Yoshimura exhaust looks good on there. And Racer X brand helping as well. Anything we can do to keep money in the kitty so we can pay for these things. We appreciate you buying some shirts. We've got the Patriotic collection. I believe if you were to order one right now, you could still get it in time to wear it this weekend, upcoming at RedBud, and we'll give you 20% off. Type in exhaust in all capital letters to get your discount. I'm rushing through the intro to this one because Davey has so much to say. We're going to take you through every single Team USA there has ever been, and the stories, the ins and outs, the interest, the lack of interest, the win streaks, the losing streaks, what a roller coaster ride it has been. Surely, throughout these two episodes, you're going to hear something you've never heard about Team USA before. And it is also a fascinating story in the bigger picture of how motocross was developing and Supercross was developing on both sides of the pond, and the way the bikes were changing, and the riders were changing, and the attitudes were changing, and ultimately the balance of power, how that has changed throughout this entire process. So we're going to get to Davey on the phone in just a moment, but first this podcast, 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 podcast. Okay, no better time to have another Davey Coombs historical podcast than right now. We are 1 week away from Motocross of Nations at RedBud. Maybe the race that I'm not sure if anyone ever imagined would actually happen. It's the race that everybody wanted to happen, but we've got it. We've got RedBud and we've got Donations. It's peanut butter and chocolate. This is amazing. It's big in a lot of ways. It's not just big, I think, for this one race. I think fans Davey are hoping that this is like the kickoff to, we're back, we win, we're into it, we're on top again. Not just for one day, but we're used to win streaks. And boy, it's been a long time since we had one of those.
It's been as long as, first time we won in 1981, we immediately became starved for wins as Team USA. And now it's been, 6 years since we last won? So there's no better time to, get back on the victory train, so to speak. But it won't be easy, but it sure will be interesting. I really can't wait to get to RedBud.
Well, that's the main thing. I mean, look, you know RedBud as well as anyone. I think you even had some hand in even helping to get this event to happen there. But this is the dream for every fan. Everyone has always imagined, what would it be like? So can you even imagine what it's going to be like?
I can, and I watched some of the videos of the preparation that the Richies have been doing up there, and some of the forward folks for Ustream, and it looks amazing. But I'll be honest with you, nothing surprises me about this from the day in 2016 when Giuseppe Luongo called me from Ustream and said, "Okay, we're changing direction in America, and we want to work in harmony." And that's the same thing we all always wanted. It was just time to sort of have a farewell to arms, and we just started talking like motocross enthusiasts. And what does the best motocross of nations ever look like? It looks like RedBud in my mind's eye, and a lot of people's mind's eye, because RedBud is the pillar of American motocross. It is the best facility, it's the best event, and it's been around as long as anything. and they immediately went to work up there, and we went to work, and Ustream's been working hard, and everyone's been looking forward to this event. And the fact that it's finally going to happen, I'm a little nervous, but I'm also not surprised. I believe it's going to be the biggest outdoor motocross race ever, at least ones on this side of the Iron Curtain, because you always hear those stories about 100,000 people in Russia. I don't think there's going to be 100,000 people anywhere anytime soon, but we could have a really extraordinary crowd. So my fingers are crossed, and obviously I'm a fan of anyone who races motocross, but I'm a homer for Team USA. I mean, this is the one race you get to say, hey, I think the world of Ken Roczen, and I think that Jeffrey Hurlings is phenomenal, but I don't want those guys to win. I want Team USA to win.
Well, we have to actually hope so, just because I can tell you, myself and Chase Stallo, we've got plenty of coverage planned for the website, but we know now, 6 years in a row, if we do not win, no one wants to read it. The fans just shut the laptop down. They don't look at their phone. They probably don't want to read a magazine story about it. There is no other race like it. It's feast or famine if you're a fan of Team USA. You lose, I'm done. I don't want to hear another word.
and that kind of brings us right to the peculiar history of Team USA. Very conflicted, very uneven at times, absolutely dominant at other times, downright disinterested sometimes, and to your point, lately, not very good. It'd be neat to see all that change all at once, and what better place than RedBud?
Well, okay, so this is amazing. I didn't even know these results existed anywhere, but you, of course, managed to find them. You actually have all of the Team USAs. We all know the Team USAs since they started winning in 1981. Most bench racers are pretty familiar. Maybe they get the years confused, but it's almost like there's history. It's almost like BC and AD in the Bible. There's the pre-81 teams, which you don't hear talked about much, but you actually have all the data on all of those teams as well.
I have as much data as you could possibly get, and the good thing is I got a lot of it from those pioneers themselves. And then I have a friend. I got to give a shout-out to Jalou. He has a website called memotocross.fr. And what it is it's sort of the European version of the vault. All the Grand Prix scores, all the designation scores, trophy designations, even the thing called the Cup designations, which was a 125 race that had a 3 or 4 year run. And without him, I wouldn't have been able to do this. And what's cool is a lot of people want to hear these stories told because they did kind of fall through the cracks of history, and a lot of people wouldn't even know who some of the guys I'm about to talk about are. But that's what makes bench racing so much fun. We get to relive these years, and we get to the good ones and the bad ones, and because that's how Team USA rolls. It's either all or nothing.
Yeah, feast or famine, like I said. Okay, so the funny thing is, you told me the other day, and you found this photo. I don't know how you found this actual photo. There's like one photo of this team in opening ceremonies. The first Team USA, it wasn't like a, hey, we're going over there to race this race. It seems like an accident. Like, hey, you guys want to do this? It wasn't.
Well, the truth is, I don't even know that they knew about the motocross and trophy designations. And, first of all, this whole thing started sort of in the ashes of Europe that followed World War II. In 1945, the war ends. The place is a wreck. Stadiums are all destroyed, so there's really no soccer to be done. The Olympics haven't been held since 1936, the famous Berlin Games, where Adolf Hitler presided. And Europe was trying to get, back to some normalcy. And one of the things they did have was an abundance of military equipment. And that includes motorcycles, because just as it started in World War I and World War II, they used a lot of motorcycle couriers. Lines would get broken, messages would have to be delivered, and the best way to get from point A to point B across an open field was on a dirt bike. So in 1947, a group of enthusiasts decided to have a race where the best riders from Holland and representatives from England and some guys from France would get together and race, and they actually did it in Holland, and they called it the Motocross of Nations, or at that point everything was French, so it was the Motocross des Nations. And they all rode 500cc bikes. It's lost to history, the film, the footage, and whatever, but there is a couple photos from it, and that was the beginning of this. At that point over in the United States, we're not even thinking about motocross. In fact, we're calling it scrambles until well into the 60s. And over the years, every now and then we'd have someone like a Bud Eakins or a Stu Peters or a Russ Darnell or Gary Bailey would go over and do a one-off race or something like that. But this thing at the end of the season called the Motocross des Nations, we never participated in that. We could never cobble a team together. So in those years, there was a period in the 50s where the British were just dominant. In fact, in 1962, the 5 British guys that were on the team all rode across the finish line arm in arm. And when you look in the records, it lists them all as first-place finishers. The same thing happened in 1964 with the Swedish team. So when you see those photos of David Bailey and Ricky Johnson stopping and going across the finish line together at Majora in 1986, and we think that's dominant, or Ryan Villapoto and Ryan Dungey doing it in 2011, imagine 5 British guys out in front of everyone riding arm in arm across the finish line, or 4 Swedes. So there's a whole lost history to American fans, to American enthusiasts. But like all things in American motocross, or at least a lot of things, it was a man named Edison Dye who really got us involved in racing the motocross and trophy des Nations. And this brings us to that photograph you were talking about, Jason. 3 Americans in blue shirts standing at what looks like the top of a mountain holding an American flag. And those 3 guys were Dick Robbins, Bob Grossi, and Mark Blackwell. And they were Husqvarna riders who were invited by Edison Dye, the U.S. importer for Husqvarna, to take sort of an exchange student trip to go over to Sweden to a place called Knutstorp to check out the factory and to maybe check out this big race that was going on. And that race was actually the Trophy des Nations. And the Trophy des Nations, for people who don't recall, was for 250cc motorcycles. It was its own race up until 1984, along with the Motocross des Nations, which was for 500cc motorcycles. So these 3 guys, 2 of whom are teenagers, and that would be Mark Blackwell and Bob Grossi. Dick Robbins is 26 years old. They're over there to check out the bikes, check things out, and they realize that if they get an FIM license and Edison Dye does all the right steps, they can actually sign up and race in the Trophy des Nations. And that would be the equivalent now of you and I deciding we're a rowing team and joining the Olympics as team, Atlantic Coast or something like that.
Uh-huh.
We would get absolutely smoked, but we would be able to represent our country or our region or whatever. So it was truly a trial by fire for these 3 guys, none of whom had ever raced in Europe. And Dick Robbins, who hails from Michigan, he was 26 years old at the time. He actually did the best out of the 3 Americans with, I believe, a 26th place finish in one of the motos. 24th in the first moto. Mark Blackwell gets a 19th in the second moto, but the Americans finished dead last. Unfortunately, Bob Grossi's bike broke in both motos, and the other teams each had 5 guys. So that's how underprepared we were.
Dead last, straight up.
Dead last. And with the race coming to Michigan, I've been able to talk to Dick Robbins a couple times. He likes to say that he's always going to be the oldest member of Team USA, because at 26, he was 8 years older than his teammates, and he's still around. He can't wait to go to Jeff Stanton's Team USA experience dinner, and he thinks it's just mind-boggling that after all these years, people are remembering that he was the original Team USA captain. His racing career kind of ended not long after he returned home, but he always watches the races. You can find him on Facebook, and I can't wait to shake his hand and watch him soak it all in at RedBud.
Yes, I've literally never heard of this guy. So there you go. He's a massive part of history if you think of it that way. First ever Team USA, and I've never heard the name. So that shows you how humble these roots are.
Well, so what these guys do,
go ahead.
They come home with tales of this crazy race. No photos. Dick Robbins managed to find just the photo that we mentioned, where he's standing there in the opening ceremonies with Blackwell and Grassi, and then a photo of the start. But apparently it rained really hard. It was an gnarly race, and a guy that some U.S. fans will be familiar with named Aki Jansson won both motos, and the Swedes dominated, which makes sense. It was in Sweden.
Oh, okay. And that's only the Trophy Nations, right? Did they not even do that? Yeah. And the Trophy Nations for 250s. So the big one, the Motocross Nations, they didn't. Nations back then, they didn't do it. They didn't even do it.
If they only had 3 guys to do the Trophy Nations, and they had to borrow the bikes from Husqvarna, it was going to be much tougher to do the Motocross of Nations. However, when they went home telling people about this event, a few very influential people got behind the idea of raising money and doing it right in 1971. One of those guys sadly passed away earlier this year, and he's better known for winning the Indy 500. His name was Dan Gurney, and coincidentally, he happened to be the Montesa distributor for the United States. So imagine an Indy 500 winner that is also a Montesa distributor, Montesa being a Spanish motorcycle. He got together with a guy named Joe Parkhurst, who was the editor and publisher and founder of Cycle World, and also one of the investors of Saddleback Park. They tried to raise as much money as they could to send a team back in 1971 when the Motocross of Nations was being held in France. And they managed to get Barry Higgins. There you go, DMXS. He really was there from the start. Brian Kinney, who was a really fast Husqvarna rider from Ohio. Sonny DeFeo, who was a CZ rider from New York. And then Gunnar Lindstrom. Gunnar Lindstrom was a transplant from Sweden. You may not know Gunnar, but you do know his son, Lars Lindstrom, who is a technician for Team Honda right now, and for a while was Chad Reed's mechanic.
Yep.
Gunnar is in the AMA Motorcycle Hall of Fame for the things he did as a racer, an ambassador, and also a team manager. He was the first team manager for American Honda. And they went over there and didn't do very well. And one of the reasons was because Brad Lackey was supposed to be there. They planned on him being there, and at the last second, the CZ factory that he rode for didn't really want to foot the bill for him to be over there. And so they found an American who was living over there named John Barclay. And I know nothing about this guy. I can't find anything out about him. He was the 5th guy on the team.
Okay.
He finished 42nd, which would be dead last, and then he didn't finish the second moto. So that was a tough go.
Yeah.
The Americans finished 10th.
Oh, improving.
Yeah, and they're proud of that. And again, it was a baby steps, lessons learned. But this time, no Trophy Nations team. They couldn't quite cobble that together.
This is an era, as you can. And by the way, folks, you can at least go on Wikipedia, and they actually do list every Motocross the Nations team that won and every year where the event was held. They don't have all the Team USAs, but they do have all the winners. Right around this time, and I know you want to mention this, the Brits have their run, Sweden has their run, and then the Belgians begin to break through, and it's Roger DeCoster at the helm of a lot of it. Right around the same time, late 60s, early 70s, and they start becoming a force.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of that, Jason, is 1972. Team USA goes back, and we'll get to how they did. But Roger DeCoster lines up for Belgium alongside Joël Robert, Jacques van Velthoven, Sylvain Gabors, some real heavy hitters. And in the Motocross of Nations, he goes 2-1 in the outright overall. In the Trophy Designations, he goes 1-1. So DeCoster in 1972 almost did what we all celebrate Danny Magoo Chandler as having done in 1982, which is be the only guy to win all four motos of the Motocross and Trophy Designations. DeCoster was beaten in that first moto by a Swede named Ben Ahlberg, but at that point, he is in Belgium are in the midst of a 10-year winning streak in the Trophy Designations and winning 6 out of 10 years in the Motocross of Nations. This is the real glory days for Belgium motocross. They are truly the gods of the motocross world. They replaced the British, who had previously been replaced by the Swedes, but in '72. It's really when they're at their most dominant, and DeCoster's leading the way. And he will continue to do so through the end of his career in 1979. So keep that in mind. We'll get back to that.
Yeah.
But the U.S. team that goes in 1972, you will recognize these names. Brad Lackey on a Kawasaki, Jim Pomeroy on a Bultaco, Jammin' Jimmy Weinert on a Yamaha, and his teammate, Gary Jones. These are the guys that would really be the modern, or at least the beginning of the modern era of American motocross. They finished 7th, which is an improvement on where they were. But there's something else that happens in 1972, has nothing to do with the designations, at least not this year, but it will over the course of time, and that is invention of Supercross. Promoter Mike Goodwin in July of 1972 fills the Los Angeles Coliseum up with dirt, and this uniquely American form of motocross racing begins, and it won't have its true effect on the designations until 1981, but we'll get there.
Okay, we got a whole 70s to go. So, hey, by 72, I mean, that's literally sounds like they pretty much were able to just pick the 4 best riders. Like, this was an honest effort, it sounds like, not just who was hanging around.
It was an honest effort, and again, they were getting funding by Dan Gurney, Joe Parkhurst, others in the industry, but that starts to go a little sideways again the following year, and the irony is we actually did better in 1973. We finished 4th. We were 1 point out of finishing 3rd. And we might have, if our very best rider at that time, Brad Lackey, had been given a bike to race. Lackey is supposed to be the 4th guy. He's stationed in Europe. He's racing for the Kawasaki factory team there. But then he signs a contract with Husqvarna for the following year. So you have to turn to the U.S. Kawasaki distributor to help pave the way to get him to Europe to ride for Team USA, and the U.S. distributor says, we're not going to sell any bikes with this, and we really can't afford it, and Lackey is a no-show. So Team USA has to go out there with 3 riders against the 4 riders that every other team has.
Oh.
And those 3 riders do quite well. Mike Hartwig, who's another Michigan guy, goes 18-18. And I know that doesn't sound really great, but for a teenager who'd never been to Europe before, throw him in a 500 class on someone else's motorcycle, against all the world's best riders, that's a damn good finish. John DeSoto, the Flying Hawaiian, goes over on a CZ. He goes 15:10, and then Jim Pomeroy, who is well known in Europe by this time, is the first American to win a Grand Prix. He goes 7:5, and we're just 1 point out of third. Unfortunately, it's Russia, or back as they were known then, the Soviet Union, who gets third. And once again, Belgium wins.
Yep, with Roger DeCoster at the helm. Again, it's so sad. People probably don't even realize Roger as a racer anymore. But as good as he's been, he was better as a racer than anything else. He's maybe the greatest ever. But now we just think of him as Roger, the team manager.
Well, DeCoster is there to lead the way for Belgium, and he's there the next year, too. But Belgium has a horrible day. The race is held in Sweden again. Sweden wins again. But get this, the Americans finish second. And go back and frame this. In 1970, we didn't qualify in our first trip. By 1974, just 5 years later, we get second. And this team is Pomeroy, Tony DiStefano, Lackey in his Husqvarna, and Jimmy Weinert. And what it shows is not that we're getting faster because we're so much better. We're getting faster because all of the Japanese people, the Japanese OEMs, the Japanese industry is getting behind the idea of racing in America, and the investment is suddenly there. And we have a Team Honda, and we have a Team Yamaha, and they're putting as much assets into their U.S. distributors as they are their Europe-based teams. And now you think that we're going to start really hitting critical mass, but it doesn't quite work out that way.
Yeah, so 74, they get second. By the way, was that a big deal? Like, was the race even really talked about? Was it something, I don't even know, in Cycle News, was it a huge deal? Like, oh my gosh, we almost won this? Or was it like, oh, it's some race over there we don't pay much attention to? How big a deal was that?
It was a big deal, and you know, Cycle News had a guy named Terry Pratt who made that wonderful Grand Prix motocross book, the black and whites of the 1972 season. He was still over there, and he covered Team USA at this event in Sweden, and also there was a film crew there. And I ask anyone who's listening to this, if you can find the footage, I'll never forget seeing it when I was a kid, because Ben Alberg, who is a Swedish rider, on a Bull Taco, dominates. He goes 1-1, and I remember thinking, you know, where's Roger DeCoster? Where's Heikki Mikkola? Where's, you know, Brad Lackey? And this old guy on a Bull Taco just smokes everyone. I have looked for that footage online everywhere. If you're listening and you know where I can find the 74 Motocross of Nations, I'd love to see it again.
Wow.
But it was on TV, and this is, you know, sort of in partnership with Gavin Tripp's U.S. Grand Prix of Motocross. People are trying to find, you know, motocross is trying to find its way into the mainstream. It's just really hard to film, even now. But back then, it was almost impossible, and that's why it wasn't on TV very often.
Yeah, that's at 74. I mean, I can't even think of what the technology was at that time to do this. So, okay, 75. So you said this starts to actually go backwards after some breakthroughs in 74.
It does just a little bit. We actually do the trophy and the Motocross of Nations in 75. And in the trophy race, which is held at Maggiora in Italy, I just love saying that because, you know, Maggiora is going to play a huge role in the history of Team USA.
Yep.
3 times. And the first time is going to be 1975. We do not win. We get third. And this team is DiStefano, Howerton, Lackey, and Pomeroy. But what's cool about this is Jim Pomeroy wins the first moto outright.
Oh.
He beats DeCoster, Mikkola, Harry Everts, Gaston Rae, all the Swedes. It's a big, big deal that an American does this. And it was also a big deal because 1975 was the year that they began having 125cc World Championships. The overall winner of the 125 class was Gaston Rae, The 250 world champion was Harry Everts, and the 500 world champion was, of course, Roger DeCoster. They had never raced in the same race together as world champions until that day in Majora, and Pomeroy beat them all. He ended up going 1-6 on the day for second overall. A Russian rider named Ovchenko ended up winning. Your guess is as good as mine, where he's from in Russia. But right then, with the second the previous year, a third in 75, you think it's all going to start happening. But then the Motocross of Nations, we don't do very good at all. We finished 9th, and now we start slipping backwards.
That's strange.
Yeah, and especially because in 76, our team is Ken Howerton, Hall of Famer, Tony DiStefano, Hall of Famer, Bob Hanna for the first time, obvious Hall of Famer, but our weak link was Rocket Rex Staten. Now, no offense to Rocket Rex, he's a badass, he was always fantastic, but in 76 he goes to Europe on a Harley Davidson.
Hey, that's USA. There you go.
Yeah. Well, in the first moto, he gets a 12th. DiStefano gets 10th. Hanna gets 16th. Not too bad, but the second moto, something bizarre happens. Because of the fact that there were 4 riders per team, and there were 11 teams on the gate, your fourth rider had to go in the third row, or the second row, sorry. Third rider, second row. So Staten was not fourth rider, second row. You got 3 on the front row, 1 on the back row.
Okay.
Staten is one of our front row guys for the second moto because he did so well. His bike won't start. The Harley Davidson, the one and only time Harley Davidson races the Motocross of Nations, by the way, they can't get it started. They pull him off the gate. They run down. They bump start him. They finally get it going. And when he pulls back to the gate, the really tall Belgian rider, Jacques van Velthoven, has taken his spot and won't move. And Rocket Rex is bumping in the back of him, waving his arms, trying to get him, and they drop the starting gate. And Rex ends up 32nd. We end up 5th, but we're honestly at this point we're kind of disorganized. We're losing interest in sort of our place on the international level because this thing Supercross back home is getting more and more attention of the riders, the industry, and even though the designations are such an important thing, both then and now, it was hard to see it from all the way over in America because it was never in America. It was never on TV, but that one time that I remember from 74, and we never won. So it was getting harder and harder to keep the interest up.
Plus, Bob Hanna going over there, that probably was a big deal, right? I mean, Hanna was, just like that, Hanna was like literally at the lightning bolts. It was like lightning.
Yeah, it was a huge deal. But then here's where Bob Hanna breaks your heart, and Bob Hanna can do that. He's really good at being cutthroat. He decides in 77 that it's just not right for him. He's just won Supercross for the first time. He's won the 250 National. Oh, sorry, he lost the 250 National, or the 125 Nationals.
Yep.
No, he lost the 125 to Glover. He lost the 500 to Marty Smith. And he decides that he doesn't want to go. So we send over Tony DiStefano, Ken Howerton, Steve Stackable on a Mako, and Gary Simmons. And they go to France, and they actually get second. But it's not like a really great second. Our highest moto finish is a third, and our only other top 10 moto finish is a sixth. It's sort of a mixed result, but everyone else broke down or had problems or whatever. And we end up with DiStefano getting third overall with a 313 score, and Stackable gets fourth overall with a 610. So to get second overall as a team was kind of a weird thing. But what it does is it galvanizes Hanna. And remember, I said he'll break your heart sometimes. He decides to fix it in 78 because he wins again everything in America. And he decides this time that he's going to go take on the man who has replaced DeCoster as the best rider in the world, and that's Heikki Mikkola, or Heikki Mikkola, depending on whether you listen to Howard Cosell in Wide World of Sports or your dad talk about it when you were a kid. In my house, he was Hickey. But Hannah goes over and takes on Heikki Mikkola. The race is in Germany at Geldorf, and Bob finds out two things. One, he is pretty fast, but two, Mikkola is faster and stronger. And he teaches Bob some lessons, but to his credit, Bob never gives up. He gets second overall, and he helps the United States get fourth. It's a distant fourth, but the sour grapes to all this is that the Russians won. And at that point, we were in a pretty serious Cold War with them, and it gave the Russians an opportunity, the Soviet Union, to sort of brag about how much better they were than the Americans. And at that point, they kind of were.
Wow, I never knew, Rocky style, we once had to send Bob Hanna to take on the Russians. That is awesome. Yeah. We sent Bob Hanna to take on the Russians. USA. So he beat all the Russians overall. He just didn't win the team event.
He didn't win the team event, but he acquitted himself well.
Yeah.
It was 7 out of 8 scores are counting at this time, and when you got a guy that's bike brakes in both motos,
yep.
That's going to hurt. That's going to leave a mark. We also participated in the Motocross of Nations that year, and Trophy Destinations. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Hey, one other thing I left out about that 78 race.
Yeah.
In the first moto, Mikkola wins on a Yamaha. Hannah gets 5th. Second place finisher, a kid on a Husqvarna named Chuck Sun.
What?
Chuck Sun, out of nowhere. No one's heard of him. He's barely made a blip on the AMA national schedule. He's a rider out of Oregon, him and his brother. He gets selected to the team, goes over, gets second. And what that does is that sets him up for a ride in Europe all through the 79 season for Husqvarna. And he learned some things over there that are going to be valuable to us in the very near future.
Okay, all right, interesting. Why did they even put him on the team? How did he end up on the team?
Well, and that's a good point to pivot. At this point, it's getting harder and harder to get the best Americans to go over because throughout the 70s, our schedule is changing. The emphasis on these international competitions, whether they were the Inter-Am, the Trans-Am, which were the fall and summer series, where we raced against the Europeans, or these destination races, they're kind of being pushed to the side because of the rush for everyone to develop better Supercross bikes. And for guys to follow a whole Supercross series, which at this point is going well into the fall. There was an overlap between the AMA Nationals and AMA Supercross, and it gets so convoluted that the factories tell the AMA in 1979, you know what? We just don't want to go to Europe. We don't want to do the races. It costs us a lot of money. We're not selling a lot of bikes. We'd rather focus on what's happening here at home.
Oh, sounds familiar.
Yeah, it does. It is. But what happens is there is no Team USA in 1979. We literally don't have enough people to go. And the race is held in Sweden. The Belgians win again. Roger DeCoster is the winner. And this, by the way, is the end of Roger DeCoster's time with Team Belgium. He will be done having been on 18 winning teams as a Belgian rider in the Trophy and Motocross of Nations.
Wow.
He is easily the most decorated rider in this event all time.
Wow, 18. And I know that's 2 events per year because it was Trophy and Motocross of Nations separate, but still 18. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So Hanna, Team USA really got Hanna in his prime. 76, he was only racing the 125s outdoors. So really the only prime year they got out of Hanna at his peak was 78 because he didn't race 77 and they didn't have a team in 79. So that was his one shot, really, that Geldorf year.
And here's the cruel irony of this. Bob Hanna stays home in 79 along with Marty Tripes, and they go water skiing.
Oh, come on. They might not have done that if they were at Motocross of Nations.
They might not have. We'll have to ask Bob next week, but they might not have. But that happened in September, and the Des Nations in 1979 was, I don't have in front of me, but it was always in September. So
Yeah. And you figure maybe they're not water skiing, maybe they're riding or training or preparing or traveling or something. So, right, it could change. You just needed one day, one thing to change, and Hanna doesn't get hurt.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, that's just a weird twist of fate. Whether it was irony, cruel, or otherwise, who knows? But the race goes on. As I said, DeCoster leads yet another win. And then the following year, Roger retires. He wins his last race, but his last race is the Grand Prix of Luxembourg, and he rides a Honda to do it. It's the one and only race of his career that he wins on a Honda. The early part of his career was on a CZ. After that was a Suzuki. And again, in 1980, Team USA does not show up. The races in England, George Jobet, Andre Malherbe, Andre Vromans, they dominate again. And the FIM is not happy about this. The Americans sitting out. And they do something that fires a shot across the bow. They take away the 125 U.S. Grand Prix. They take it off the schedule beginning in 1982 as a penalty for Team USA not doing the Des Nations in 79 and 80.
Wow.
And this has a profound effect on a few people, including the AMA. So they decide once again that they're going to try and cobble a team together, but once again, they can't. And at this point, the really top riders in America are Ken Howerton for Team Suzuki, Mark Barnett's the 250 Supercross champion, Howerton's the 250 Outdoor champion, Glover is three-time 125 champion, Brock Glover for Team Yamaha. Hanna is still really good. Kawasaki has got, at that point, Stackable and Goat Brecker and a young Jeff Ward. Anyway, they don't want to go. Well, the people that get really mad about this, it begins with Larry Myers, who we mentioned earlier, of High Point Racing Products. He's the announcer for a lot of the Outdoor Nationals and Supercross, and he just really wants to, and I paraphrase him here, kick those commies' asses. and so does a guy named J.J. Hanfield, who works for Bel Ray, which is, at that time, bigger than Lucas Oil, bigger than Maxima, bigger than, anything that you can imagine now. I mean, everyone ran Bel Ray at the time. And also, John and Rita Gregory of JT Racing, they were like, well, can we field a team? Can we get all of our riders together? And it's just not happening. And into this picture comes Roger DeCoster.
Wow. And
Roger decides, yeah, I will do it. I will get some riders together. I'll talk Honda into it. And he is friends at this time with the editor of Motocross Action, a guy named Dick Miller. And so this group of people, DeCoster, Miller, Hanfield, Larry Myers, the Gregorys, they convince Honda to let them take 4 guys on Team Honda and go over and race the Motocross and Trophy Des Nations in 1981. And they did it because they wanted to save Carlsbad as the USGP for the 500 class, and they wanted to save Unadilla. And everyone thinks it's a joke because no one has really heard much of Johnny O'Mara or Donnie Hansen. They have heard a little bit of Chuck Sun. He's the 1980 500 national champion by this point, and they've heard of Danny Laporte because he was the 79 500 national champion. But none of those guys had ever done much on the world stage. Their names would soon become synonymous with the world stage. But the four of them get together with Roger DeCoster as the Team USA manager, and they go back to Europe. And ironically, the 1981 Trophy des Nations, which comes first, is in Lommel, Belgium. And that is the heart of the Belgian motocross world. And you can imagine what a splash it made that Roger DeCoster, the greatest rider in the history of Belgium, comes back with four Americans, and he's now a Team USA.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Good thing there wasn't social media back then. Would have been very angry.
Yeah.
But they probably didn't think that Roger was bringing in a team that could beat them.
No one thought that, especially because Lommel, do you remember the holes that were at Lommel when we had the Des Nations there in 2013?
Yeah, I got it in my nightmares. I remember well. Yeah.
Well, those holes were formed well before 1981, and they were certainly there in 1981. But on September 6th, Team USA, with these really high numbers, I think we were number 48, 49, 50, 51, something like that, lines up. They're scoffed at by the establishment, because at that time the establishment is Belgian motocross, German motocross, the Swedes. No one expects what happens next. Now, remember we were talking earlier about Supercross?
Yep.
There's not a jump on the track at Lommel. So it wasn't like we were jumping things that no one else was. But what the Americans did is they hit the first turn wide open. And instead of pacing themselves for a 40 plus 2 lap moto, 40 minutes plus 2 lap, which is what it was back then, they rode it like a Supercross race. They were just full adrenaline, wide open, and it was mind-boggling for the Europeans because they were used to, at that time, a sort of more gentlemanly approach. You kind of conserved your energy for the end, and then you charged. The problem was the Americans were kind of long gone by that point. In the first moto, Johnny O'Mara gets second, Danny Laporte gets third, Donnie Hansen gets fourth, and Chuck Sun gets eighth. It is a mind-boggling finish. The only guy that's not caught off guard is probably one of the best riders never to win a world champion, and a guy that Roger DeCoster once told me before Everts and before Hurlings was the best European sand rider of all time, and that was Andre Vromans. Vromans is the only one not caught off guard in that first moto. He wins, and he wins the second moto too, but everyone else, still shell-shocked, gets beat by Laporte in second, O'Mara in third, Chuck Sun gets sixth, and our lowest finish was 11th. And it was an absolute ass-whipping of everybody, and no one can believe it.
And, yeah, I doesn't make sense then, but then seeing how things went in 2012 in Lommel, it makes even less sense now. You know what I mean? Like, we thought Ryan Dungey was a good sand rider, and maybe he is to some degree, but he was completely lost out there. But a really cool point you made to me a week ago when we decided to do this. In a way, the advancement of the American riders had been hidden because there was this brief 2-3 year span where Americans and Europeans weren't racing each other. So no one knew how much better they were getting because we didn't have a lot of these USGPs and the Trans AMA was gone and things like that, right?
Yeah, the Trans USA, it was still there. There was the Trans AMA, but then there was a lawsuit and they had to change the name. But the Europeans had lost interest, and the U.S. fans were beginning to lose interest because they'd rather go to a stadium at this point and watch more Supercross racing than a second outdoor series, and that's kind of what the Trans USA was. So the last year that there's any involvement whatsoever from Europe is 79, and it's really only two guys, DeCoster and Graham Noyce from England. And by 1980, the series is down to 4 races. It's almost an afterthought. it's impossible to find footage of it because it was never on TV or anything like that. And this sort of weird experiment, or this cauldron that we're living in, that is this change to a Supercross mentality, a Supercross style of riding, is happening out of plain sight because no European is able to watch it. You know, you can't find a lot of races on TV in Europe in 1980, let alone 81, and it won't be for some time. And you know, the Europeans, when they lose that race in 1981, they all think, it's got to be an outlier. It's got to be a you know, what do you call it? Just a
fluke.
It was a
fluke.
It was It wasn't supposed to happen. It couldn't have happened. They didn't even believe it.
But by the way, they did it
later,
twice. We have to mention that was Trophy Nations. What is it? A week later? That was so weird back then. It was.
Yep.
Then they have to do it a week later, and they pulled that one off too.
7 days later, they show up in Bilstein, Germany. They're riding 500s, and for O'Mara, it's the first time he's ever ridden a 500.
Wow.
I think it might have been the first time for Hansen as well. They go out, and this time they don't win by far. They barely squeak it out. They have 42 points, the low score. England is second with 43. And the outright winner is a guy named Håkan Karlqvist from Sweden. And this kind of spells sort of the end of the line for the Swedes. He's the last really great Swedish rider that we'll see. And that's a different podcast for another time.
Okay.
But you know, Husqvarna has gone away for the most part. It'll come back, obviously, years later. But it was sort of the last hurrah for Sweden that Karlqvist would dominate like that. He'd go on to win a world championship in the 500 class. But by this point, everyone's thinking, man, there must be something in the water in America because DeCoster led those guys to wins in both the Motocross and Trophy of Nations. There was literally a week where the world was turned upside down. That was it.
So do you think, so that's right. They're improving rapidly because of Supercross, but no one in Europe can even see it. The amount of USGPs has been cut because they got rid of the 125 USGP. They used to race a lot when all the Euros came over for the Trans AMA and then Trans USA. That doesn't happen anymore. They don't race the nations in 79 and 80. So as you were telling me, it's almost like for a 2-year span, America was making rapid gains, but no one in Europe was able to know. And then when they finally came back, it was a whole new ball game. Really interesting.
And that's, you know, the first people that pick up on this are guys like Eric Gabors, who's the younger brother of Sylvain Gabors. He's like, man, we got to start holding some Supercross races. The French figure it out, and they decide to begin the Bercy Supercross in 84. But the thing is, the conduit for all of this, the go-between, as it were, is DeCoster. And DeCoster's married an American girl at this point. He's living in California. He's managing Team Honda. And he's the one that is giving the Americans the guidance they never had in the 70s on how to race the designations. But he's also got a front row seat to this laboratory where we're learning Supercross and beginning to adapt it to outdoor motocross. And that doesn't mean we're building jumps. It means the way they attack the track, the importance placed on the start, the importance placed on sprinting. And that will come into even more obvious focus for the Europeans in 1982. Because we go back to the designations, get this, with 3 different new team members. It's still Team Honda, but Danny Laporte decides to stay in Europe and races for Yamaha. Chuck Sun gets hurt in 82 and doesn't have a very good year, so they replace him with Jim Gibson and a wild child from NorCal named Danny Magoo Chandler. We still have O'Mara, and we still have Donnie Hansen, and at this point, Donnie Hansen is the best rider on the planet. He'd won the 250 Supercross Championship. He'd won the 250 National Championship, and he goes to Europe before the designations to race the last GP. He wins both motos outright, and people are thinking that he's going to be the guy to dominate, or at least lead the Americans in the Motocross and Trophy Designations, tragically, he ends up crashing 4 days before the race at Rolf Diefenbach's track in Germany and is concussed so badly that Donnie will never race again. It's one of the early times I can ever remember hearing that a head injury ended someone's racing career or even their athletic career. But it was a terrible thing, and he was comatose for about 6 weeks, and he made a valiant attempt to come back, but it never quite worked out. So DeCoster has to replace him because we may be good, but we're not that good that we can win with 3 guys. And he calls a newcomer to Team Honda, David Bailey. And we go off to Europe to race in Switzerland and to race again in Germany. And this time, the beatdown is exceptional because Danny Magoo Chandler does what DeCoster almost did 10 years earlier, but he does it like to 11. He absolutely slays both motos in what must be considered the single most dominant performance in Designations history. And what's weird is he's never won a single race as a professional to this point. He's not won a national. He's not won anything. He just goes over there and lays a flat-out ass-whooping on everyone. It's a sight to behold.
Yeah, and over the course of 2 weekends, that's what makes these early days so weird. 2 weekends. He was feeling it, but twice. You know, Paul Malin, we'll get to that eventually, had his 1 day, but this is bizarre that he had it 2 days in a 7-day span.
Yeah, and I may have to clean up something right there. I think Magoo had won a 500 national. Maybe it might have been at Mount Morris that year. So I take that back. But at that point, you know, we had a 125 class, a 250 class, a 500 class. So the talent was spread over 3 things, and the 500 class, quite honestly, wasn't the premier class. But nevertheless, he was a complete unknown in Europe, and what he did remains to this day the most surprising, dominant thing ever. And now we're off and running.
Yeah, one other thing, he got stung by a bee, right, and had an allergic reaction, but still won the darn moto anyway.
He had to take his goggles off. He was such a sort of a neo-privateer. He was a Honda rider, but he was a B-team rider, which meant he was on the support team. He didn't want to throw his goggles away, and so he kept them in his mouth the last part of the moto.
Oh, my gosh.
And there's a great photo, I think, in dirt bike or motocross action from the period of Magoo with his goggles in his mouth, as a Scott face mask. The other thing is Johnny O'Mara badly twisted his ankle and had to be carried to his motorcycle for the last moto of the second race, and had to be carried to the podium. And Magoo, even though he'd been stung by a bee, puts Johnny O on his back and carries him to the podium.
Oh my gosh!
It was just it was the ultimate hero move, the ultimate team leadership thing, and incredibly, Magoo will never race for Team USA again.
Well, it looks like things changed. It was difficult to get a team even to go. They skipped it 2 years. Honda with DeCoster had to rescue it. And then all of a sudden, 83, it appears the floodgates are open, and now everybody's on board.
Everybody's on board. All 4 of the manufacturers, the Japanese at the time, get together with the AMA. They kind of demand to participate. And the AMA, granted what Roger and J.J. Hanfield and Dick Miller and Larry Myers and the Gregories did was phenomenal, but it didn't represent American motocross the way the AMA wanted it to. They asked Roger to stay on the team as the team manager. They asked him to pick the team, but they asked him to do it in a I don't know if you'd call it a democratic way, but a fair way where you pick one rider per team. And so in 1983,
per brand, right? One rider per brand.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
One rider per brand for the team. And he picks David Bailey for Team Honda because he knows he's got to ride 250 and a 500. Mark Barnett is picked for Suzuki. Brock Glover for Yamaha. Jeff Ward for Kawasaki. And they go to Europe, and they just absolutely crush everybody. It's not even close. I have a friend named Tom Brinkman. He went to cool here at WVU. I didn't know him then, but I knew him when he became a promoter. He was the guy that ran Monster Mountain for a while. Tom was stationed in Europe at the time, and he was an aspiring photographer, and he's the guy who took a photo of the race in Angers, Belgium, the first moto, and Team USA is riding first, second, third, and fourth, and he got all four of them and the coster holding a pit board into the frame. It's one of the craziest photos you've ever seen, and it just kind of spells what Team USA's dominance was like at the time.
Wow. Yeah, that's an awfully high level. Even when they were winning, and there's been lots of Team USA wins more than anybody else, but this is like peak right here. It's like we send anybody we want, any type of bike, 250, 500, whatever weekend it is, whatever track, in Belgium, doesn't even matter. That's a huge gap they had at that time.
It was, and you got to remember, the talent pool in America is huge by now. Motocross has been booming. There's guys that aren't just from California, although we had some teams that were strictly California. And in fact, we'll send one in 1984 when it's Jeff Ward, Johnny O'Mara, Rick Johnson, and the transplanted David Bailey. And here, though, we were dominant the first week, but the second week we had some issues, and the issue was that David Bailey got hurt in the first race. Bailey, who had joined Team USA the first time because Hansen got hurt, this time Bailey gets hurt, and DeCoster is once again in a bind, and he doesn't know what to do because Bailey's a no-go. It's too late to get another Honda rider over, but someone figures out that there's another guy, an American, that happens to be in Amsterdam racing a Supercross that someone had thrown together. It's Brock Glover.
Wow.
So Glover goes to Finland, Sweden, to take the place of Bailey, and he's got a borrowed bike, and all he's got is his suspension they brought with him, and it's Supercross suspension, which wasn't that different at the time, but still. And Glover goes out and goes 2-2, which is phenomenal when you think about it. But what makes it more phenomenal is the fact that Jeff Ward goes 1-1. And we just absolutely dominate for the fourth year in a row. And by now, the really great Europeans are all done. And by that I mean DeCoster, Mikola, Adolf Wheel, Gennady Moiseev. It's going to take a new generation of European riders, a new group, to somehow figure out a way to beat us. And that doesn't appear it's going to happen anytime soon, because having four riders from, say, France at the time go up against four riders from just California is almost not a fair fight. So the FIM does something that was very controversial at the time, but in hindsight, they had to do it. They had to get the cost down. They had to make the race more compelling. Team USA couldn't keep winning. They decide to combine the motocross and trophy designations together into one event. They drop the trophy name. They call it the motocross designations. And what they do is they open it up to 125s as well. So at the 1985 race, which will be held in Geldorf, Germany, each country is asked to pick three riders: a 125 rider, a 250 rider, a 500 rider. And it doesn't take a road scholar to guess how this is going to turn out, because our 125 rider is Ron Lachine on a Works Honda. Our 250 rider is Jeff Ward, who was the 250 Supercross and 250 national champion in 1985. And our 500 guy is once again David Bailey. It's a murderer's row of American talent. Nevertheless, some newcomers that are part of the new generation that I mentioned do show up, and they're pretty fast. Ron Lachine gets all he wants from Pekka Väkänen, who's from Finland, and Davy Strybos, who's a 16-year-old kid from the Netherlands at the time. David Thorpe from England actually wins 2 out of the 3 motos on the 500 beating David Bailey. And the other moto winner is another Dutch guy named Kees van der Ven, who is one of those guys that probably, arguably, one of the best riders never to win a world title. But he's a revelation in Germany on the 500. But even though Bailey gets beaten all three motos, he's right there. Jeff Ward, takes two of the 250 motos, and Ron Lechien is literally untouchable in the 125. And he comes from the second row in one of the motos to get fourth against the 250s and 500s, because that year they raced them all together.
What were there, like 60-some guys on the track or something crazy?
There were 63 riders.
Oh.
And you can find video of this. Just Google the 85 designations, and you'll see that the Europeans are starting to ride a little more like the Americans, and they're fast. But again, Team USA, three guys, and it's hard for the other countries to do that.
Because we know what's coming, the legendary one, and then the one at home. So we'll pick up with those.
Okay, perfect. Just remind me where we were, and we'll cue it up right there.
Starting at 86 when we come back. Thanks. I'll figure it out tomorrow. Thanks. See ya.
All right, bye.
Yep. Yeah, sorry, dudes. We went an hour there, and we are still only at a race from 33 years ago. So we're going to make this two different editions. I'll edit the other one. We'll get these rolled out, and we'll drown you in Team USA spirit and Motocross of Nations history as we lead into the Monster Energy FIM Motocross of Nations at RedBud. It is really happening. It is coming. I cannot wait. Hopefully I'll see you folks there. I don't know if you can match this one if you're not in person. So hopefully you got a ticket. And hopefully there's room to fit you, because this thing is outrageous from what I'm hearing the crowd is going to be like. So we'll see you folks soon at RedBud, and keep listening to the podcast for more. Thanks to Yoshimura, of course, for backing these things. 63 years of research and development with 4-stroke exhaust systems. Thanks to RacerX brand for backing us. Type in exhaust in all capital letters to get your 20% discount. See you next week.